Good afternoon. Welcome to our fourth quarter webinar. Today, we're going to wrap up the year as it relates to law enforcement traffic safety fatalities. My name is Nick Breul. I'm a senior project manager here at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. We have with us today Rio Nelson, and then, of course, my assistant and OSW team member, Anna Muckenfoos, who's going to make sure we don't have any technical difficulties, which, if you guys know me, I can be prone to having a gaffe or two. So we're going to cover, I want to do, as always, just a few things here. One, bring you up to date on everything that's going on with the Memorial Fund and our programs, events, and our officer safety and wellness initiatives, just to make sure if any of you are new joining this, you get a little bit of an idea as to exactly what it is we do here at the Memorial Fund, and how we support NHTSA with data. And NHTSA, of course, supports us and allows us to bring these programs to you. Before I forget, questions, please put questions in the chat and we'll get to your questions. Or if you have a comment, and it's a good comment, we'll definitely share that with the group. And if you have any ideas as to traffic-related safety topics that you would like to see us present on or want more detail on, or would like to hear more about, or have a suggestion as to who's running a great program, whom we might want to hear from, please share that with us. We're always looking for dynamic guests to bring on with new ideas. It's been a while since I think we've had anybody on, and I think our last guest was Below 100, and you'll hear a little bit more about our partnership with Below 100 as we move on through the presentation. So I want to thank you all for joining, and I'm going to share my screen now and start our presentation. Here we are. So you should all recognize that as the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. We don't have any snow here in DC right now, and to be honest with you, we're not in DC. We're in beautiful downtown Wheaton, Maryland, because the museum has a huge event in it today, and we would be competing with noise. And normally, if you're familiar with these webinars, I do them from the museum and try and give some kind of a cool background that you may not have seen to entice you to visit the museum if you ever make it to Washington. But today, there's kind of a big event going on in the museum, and there was really no room at the inn for us for this webinar. So one thing I want to turn your attention to, we did just complete our end of the year report that came out on January 7th. This has a detail of all the year-end statistics for 2025 and our calculations for line of duty deaths and each one of the categories. And this is good news. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get deeper into what's going on with regard to traffic-related fatalities. But this year, and if you get an opportunity, go online to NLEOMF.org, and you can download this report, and there's some graphs in there, and it gives you a good idea as to how we ended out the year. But we were down in every category, and down 25% across the board. So I turn your attention just to that if you have a time to give that a quick peek. We have a lot of events, and these are just two that I highlighted that are coming up. One is tomorrow on the 15th. We do have in-person events at the museum quite often, sometimes at night or in the afternoon. This is a book signing and a roundtable discussion. If you recall the 1982 Air Florida crash here in Washington, D.C., and if you've ever been to the police museum, you'll know that we have that U.S. Park Police helicopter hanging from the ceiling. That helicopter is the one that rescued four and went back, unfortunately, couldn't find the fifth victim, rescued four out of the frozen Potomac on that terrible day in January of 1982. And it shouldn't escape any of us that something very similar happened less than a year ago. We're coming up on its annual anniversary here with that crash outside of National, where the helicopter crashed into the regional flight trying to land, and again, ended up in the frozen Potomac. So that event is tomorrow. Again, if you're local, you can go to that. There is a virtual event that's an online event on the 20th, and that's about chaplains. And this is part of our officer safety and wellness program and events, where we're focusing on police chaplains and how important they are. In my agency, the Metropolitan Police Department, We have Monsignor Salvatore Criscolo, who's still serving, apart from an Episcopal chaplain and a rabbi, and some other faith leaders who are very important to not only our conversations with the community, but to supporting line officers. So this is just a quick picture of our landing page. So you guys can all get an idea when you click on NLEOMF.org. This, if you can see my mouse, that's Officer Safety and Wellness. You click on that, and that's going to take you to all our programs. You want to know about events in the museum, click on that. And then if you click Memorial, several little things are going to drop down, but you'll be able to find preliminary numbers and our latest fatality reports, about as well as things about the Memorial side will have how you submit a name with details like that. So I just wanted to give everybody a snapshot of that. It's self-explanatory, but I wanted to quickly just let everybody see how that works and where you can find our resources. So speaking of resources, we have a number of things that we support or work with in partnership. NHTSA being one of our number one partners. We also work with the Bureau of Justice Assistance on the Safe LEO program, which is suicide awareness for law enforcement. I've been a trainer for Safe LEO. It's an excellent program. If you are able to get the appropriate number of people, they will come to your agency, start with your leadership, get their minds right about what the issues are, and then we can train supervisors, first line supervisors, as well as line officers, and they can also train the trainer. So this program can then be incorporated throughout the entire agency and or neighboring agencies. And then there's Destination Zero. I'll talk about that in a minute. And we have this partnership, with Below 100. And, below 100, it's interesting. We probably got below 100 this year. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk about the numbers. But this is a good news year in terms of the numbers of law enforcement fatalities. Here's a picture when we had our summit back in July of 2025. Below 100 presented, along with a number of really great presenters. And we heard from John Marshall and others, whom I'll talk about again in a minute. But we really are working together with Below 100 because they've got such a great safety program. I also want to mention our ambassador program. This is something that anyone who is current or former, retired in good stead, is a current dispatcher, can join. And this allows you to assist the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund by being a representative from your region to the NLEOMF. So if in fact there's a regional line of duty death and we need someone to talk to say, hey, can you approach this agency? We're not hearing from them, or maybe you can help guide them through this process, or you can help tell them about all these officer safety and wellness resources. We also use ambassadors for fundraising activities. We have some very great ambassadors who put together sporting events with basketball, baseball, and hockey. And so there'll be law enforcement appreciation nights that we arrange, and ambassadors assist us with getting the word out about ticket sales. And of course, that all helps benefit the Memorial Fund. Unfortunately, we always need revenue and donations to keep us doing what we do. And I bring this up quickly. If you're interested, this QR code, you can hold your phone up in front of it and it'll take you to the registration page. And then you can also read more about what it means to be an ambassador. There's some great ambassadors who come and help us during Police Week. May during Police Week is a huge deal here in DC, and we have lots of supporters and ambassadors who come to DC to help support all of those events going on during Police Week. Things like managing the honor guard or helping with seating, moving candles, whatever it might be. We're always looking for volunteers to help. We had an award we gave out last year to a great guy who has been a great friend to the Memorial Fund, as well as to law enforcement and to law enforcement traffic safety. And we now have this eponymous award for John Marshall, and we are always looking for folks to submit names of people they believe are worthy of this award. So last year we gave the award to John, and he is still, he might be retired, but he's still out there working, and I believe he may be appearing in some presentations that will be happening at Lifesavers. So John is still out there, still fighting for traffic safety. But if you have someone you'd like to nominate for the Traffic Safety Award, the John Marshall Traffic Safety Award, we'd like to hear from you, and we'll get back in touch with you and get the details, and then we'll form a committee and make a decision. But this is a great honor, and we'll be honoring the individual who gets this award in September of 2026. So I said I'd bring out Destination Zero. Again, the DZ page on our website has lots of information. And these are what the awards look like. We give out the National Officer Safety and Wellness Awards every year. These are the folks who won last year. I just put up their patches. You all can read them for yourselves. Those are the 5 categories. And it started at 4, but we were getting so many submissions with regard to wellness, people concentrating on nutrition, sleep, fitness, emotional support, all that. We had to sort of open up another category so we could acknowledge all of the good work that is being done. And then sometimes very small agencies doing what they can with very little, but making a true difference in the lives of their officers. So Destination Zero, the DZ Awards, something that if you have somebody who is doing great work in traffic safety, have them please submit it to us for consideration of the National Officer Safety and Wellness Awards. So here's where we are. This is how we finished. Again, I would remind you that our 2025 numbers are preliminary, and I see I didn't change the dates at the top. My mistake. I apologize. Those are the actual numbers, though, for these years. The 111 is one of the lower numbers we've had, and if you're familiar with ODMP, they recorded 97 line of duty deaths this year, which is below 100, and we recorded 111. And one of the things that is incorporated into that 111 are 14 cases related to the 9/11 terrorist attacks in 2001. And that is something that continues to affect law enforcement and officers who served at those rescue and recovery operations. That is something that those are names we still add to the wall. However, in terms of our 2025 numbers, if we were to remove those 14, we would be below 100 line of duty deaths. And that's not to say we're not going to count them. We don't care. That's not what we're saying. But what we are saying is that in terms of the context of events that occurred in 2025, we are below 100 line of duty deaths this year. And I think that's important because it's been over 80 years since we've ever been this low. And we can talk about the reasons and talk about what's happening on the street, and we can attribute it to better training. We can attribute it to better safety management. We can attribute it to a number of things. And detractors will contribute it to law enforcement not being as engaged as they used to be. I don't think that's the case. As we look at the numbers now, you see we're down 25% overall. And you see I put asterisks next to the traffic related. If you've come and listened to these webinars before, you understand that as a researcher for NHTSA, I'll pull out some of those cases, usually much older cases where the cause of death is not immediately attributable to the traffic crash. We have one this year. It's a crash from 2004 where the individual died. The death certificate will say one thing and may not necessarily relate to what typically a death certificate will say, such as blunt force injuries due to traffic accident. And I know we should all be saying crashes, but on these death certificates, which we read, it'll read that way. So very often those cases that get evaluated by our pathologist to ensure that, in fact, this ultimate death 20 years later was the result of that crash, I count it because the primary or the proximal item that related to that death was, in fact, that crash way back when. So asterisks are on here because it is showing an older case or a case that might have been officially counted differently by the Memorial Fund proper. And another example of that is there is an individual who was struck by an axle that flew off of a truck. I counted that as a traffic-related injury, but the information and the cause of death was a crush injury. So it gets counted a little differently, but not by me because it's traffic related. I know that's a lot. I apologize. Other causes, again, those COVID cases and the 9/11, although the 9/11 cases seem to just keep going, but COVID cases and other related things like heart attacks, beatings, stabs, drownings, helicopter crash, boat accidents, all that, those numbers have been going down. So that's good news. And some of those physical causes that we capture have also gone down by about 37%. So let's look at the breakout of fatal cases regarding traffic. There were 12 automobile crashes, 14 struck by crashes, and 6 motorcycle crashes. Now, in the detail I'm giving you with these numbers, there's actually 7 motorcycle crashes. There's one that hasn't been submitted and I haven't been able to review yet. And in the automobile crashes, there's actually 13 that we were following, and one of those cases has not been submitted. This happens every year when we have an agency with a case that we've been following that by all the news accounts and information we get, it's a legitimate line of duty death. And for whatever reason, that agency has difficulty or doesn't send the case to us to consider. So ultimately, if we don't get it in, it doesn't get counted. It'll be counted if they get it in next year, but the window for folks to get that line of duty death information to us so they can be included in this coming May's group is closing. So I'm giving you only the cases that I was able to review. And what I do is we get a lot of material submitted to us on these cases. So it's really important. I go through the crash report, autopsy report, investigative report. They all have to fill out a data form that gives a lot of information on it. I go through all that to pull out the points that I relay to you that I think are the points we have to focus on to make it safer. So for 2025, the average age was 42. Average years of service was 12. There were 29 males killed and 3 females killed. And again, this is all traffic related fatalities. And those numbers really haven't changed in terms of the average. That's fairly consistent. And even the breakdown between male and female is quite consistent across years. So now I want to do an analysis of the vehicle crashes, not struck-bys and not motos. I want us to talk about the vehicle crashes and what we were able to find out with regard to 2025 and what happened in those crashes during the year. So the 12 vehicle crashes, 4 of them were single vehicle crashes. And I have to say, I was very encouraged this year because halfway through the year, we hadn't had not one single vehicle crash. And that's unusual. And I was very encouraged by that. Now we've had 4 later in the year. It's unfortunate. These are preventable. Most of the details are they're responding priority and are going too fast and lose control and strike a fixed object. I believe one of these crashes, the officer was not on a response, but lost control while going around a curve to merge onto a roadway and lost control and ended up down into a ditch, hitting a culvert. Others, the latest one that occurred towards the end of the year was a pursuit of a motorcyclist, and the deputy was, I think, trying to make a U-turn and just too fast. And of course, unfortunately, in that case, no seatbelt. We'll get into that. 3 were rear end crashes, and it's unfortunate because they were all trucks. And in each one of these cases, the officers ran into the back of a stopped or slowing semi-tractor trailer. One was stopping in the left lane to turn left. The other one was slowing to merge off of the highway. But these are unfortunate because most likely the driver, the police officer, is distracted and crashed right into the back of those cars. And then, in a couple of those cases, no seatbelt. 2 were T-bone crashes at intersections. And one of those involved a pursuit of a stolen vehicle. The other one involved a deputy in a rural section hitting a trailer that was hauling produce. And the trailer was crossing the roadway, and the tractor trailer was crossing the roadway, and the deputy ran right into the side of the trailer. One was a head-on crash. Another one was an officer who was in his car and was rear-ended, and his car was just smashed. This is one of those cases where, we tell you to wear your seatbelt even when you're in the car. I'll tell you right now, that would not have made a difference in this case because his car was hit so violently, it crushed his car up against the tractor trailer. He had stopped to assist, And it was a very violent crash. And then I don't know if you heard about this. Unfortunately, a deputy on his way home in his marked car in uniform, finishing his shift on what we call coming and going, he was driving along the roadway and some horses came out right in front of his car. And he hit two of the horses, and that caused that, he killed the horses and ran off the road himself and ended up dying as a result of that crash. Very unusual. Every year we seem to sort of have these anomalous cases, and this year it was someone running into some loose horses. So what were they doing? Well, as I mentioned, 4 were in pursuit, 4 were on patrol, 2 were responding to a call, and 2 were coming and going, meaning they were in their take-home cars, going to or from work, but we consider them a deterrent, representing law enforcement on duty if they're out there on the roadway in an unmarked car, with the responsibility of enforcing the laws if they see a violation. So we count that. Seatbelts. This is it, folks. If we can't fix this, we can prevent deaths. And I can already tell you there are cases this year where someone would have survived had they had their seatbelt on. There's no question. And some of you might want to bristle at that. I'm telling you, it's a fact. And I've seen it in other cases. We have got to get over this idea that it's tactically not safe to have your seatbelt on. It is more unsafe to not have it, statistically and otherwise, than to not wear that seatbelt. I love these reality shows, and I like watching some of the shows like On Patrol Live or whatever it is. And of course, I'm constantly looking. Most of those guys aren't wearing their seatbelt. Some of them are. Some of them are. And there's an EMS show I watch, and I noticed that some of the EMS folks are not wearing their seatbelt, even when they're going code 1 or code 3, whatever you might call it. It's inexplicable to me that in this day and age that we are still having an issue. And if you can read that slide there, 50% of the officers in 2025 were not wearing their seatbelt. If I get this next one missing case in, and I find out that individual is not wearing their seatbelt, that percentage will be back up to close to 56 or almost 60%, as it was in 2024. I thought we were making progress with the average at least going down a little bit, and I know these are small numbers, but we've got to do better. We just simply have to tackle this issue. Again, if you have any questions or comments, be sure to put them in. So let's move on to struck by crashes. And this is where we need to make more progress with safety on the roadway. There were 14 struck by fatalities in 2025. Included in that number is the deputy in Texas who was struck and killed by an axle that flew off a passing truck and hit him while he was making a traffic stop. And, again, in that scenario, we want to talk about right side approaches because he was not on the right side of the vehicle. He was out talking to the passenger on the passenger side with his back to a live lane. Right side approach. Here's a 7-year look at struck by crashes from 2019 to 2025. You see that huge spike we had. And that was, I think, post-COVID, really. People were getting back on the road and acting, they were out of their mind. And people are still driving very recklessly. I talk to my members of my family, and even what I see when I'm driving around, I have a camera in my car, front and back camera that I just keep on. And I have a little file of all the ridiculous driving that I've observed and kept a quick little snippet of the bad behavior that I've seen. And it's inexcusable the way some people are operating right now. And we just have to make sure our officers aren't mimicking some of that behavior. But of course, distracted driving is a huge issue now. Everyone seems to have their beak in their phone. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But here we ended up with 14. You see our low was back in 2023 when we had 10. Again, I know these numbers are going to go up and down in their years when we have certain things. But it's something we need to focus on, and we need to increase our officers, deputies, and troopers' awareness when they're on the roadway and their steps that they can take to protect themselves. Excuse me. So the circumstances for the struck by, 4 of the officers struck and killed were at existing crash scenes. To me, this is one of the most maddening circumstances because you and I know there are lights, cones, fire trucks, police cars, people in the roadway, people with reflective vests on, etc. And these cars, now not all of these scenes were like that. There were There were a couple that occurred just as the officers were arriving and getting out of their car, but they have their lights on. They're in uniform. But in the other two of the other scenes, they were full-on crash scenes that these officers were struck at. So it really is, it speaks to the problem with people not obeying, slow down and move over. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But it's just people, despite all of the lights and markings, they're just, I don't know what they're doing. We know they're impaired. We know they're distracted, but they're not looking up, and they're probably speeding. So they come on the scene so fast. They react too slowly. 3 were directing traffic when they were struck. Again, tire deflation devices. 2 struck and killed deploying tire deflation devices. This is entirely preventable, right? You can use the tether. Make sure you're communicating with the folks in the pursuit that you're laying out sticks or spikes, whatever you want to call them, and you yourself are behind more than your patrol vehicle. That is not protection, and are behind an abutment or a rail, guardrail, something that will divert that vehicle if it comes near you. And you use that tether to pull those strips, those spikes, those tire deflation devices in front of that speeding vehicle. And if you've seen me present before, one of the best ones I ever saw, if you can see my thumbnail, 2 deputies on either side of the road, both behind barriers, had their spike strips, stop sticks, whatever they were using, on the roadway, and there was nowhere for that vehicle to go to avoid them, because they both pulled them out to make sure that car couldn't avoid them as they were stretched across both sides of the road. And as the car moved to avoid them, the deputy was able to pull that tether and keep those strips right in front of the car. We are not saying don't use them. Some agencies have decided not to use them, but we are saying there is a safe way to use these devices. 1 individual was struck while he was assisting a motorist. Another was talking with a citizen, and this is an intentional. We had a couple of circumstances of intentional ramming of officers. One of the ones who was directing traffic was run over and killed by the father of an individual who just recently been killed by the police. So I guess that was payback. I don't know. Another one here, in this person who was stopped talking with a citizen, the vehicle went out of its way, crossed the double yellow line, struck the officer, and kept on going in a deliberate, intentional act to kill that officer. And then in the last case, the individual was removing debris. A hay bale had fallen into the roadway, and the trooper was trying to get that hay bale out of the way, and another vehicle came up behind and struck the trooper while he was trying to move that hay bale. Again, a little bit of an unusual circumstance, but almost every year we get 1 or 2 cases of officers who have stopped, turned on their lights, gotten out into the highway to try and remove debris out of the highway. One year it was a ladder, another year it was a tire, something like that. So it's very dangerous. One of the things that, and I think I mentioned it later, a number of these crashes occurred in dark hours, in other words, at night. So that's something for us to consider. Certainly that'll enhance the chances of someone being struck because of the low light conditions. But again, all these patrol cars have their lights on. So 9 of the 14 crashes occurred in dark hours. I think that's something we need to look at. 7 of them I was able to deem as violations of slow down and move over for that individual state's law. 4 involved impaired drivers, and 1 was a confirmed distracted driver. A lot of times in the reports we don't get all those final details. A lot of times we get the investigative reports that are submitted that then have the outcome of any subsequent toxicology reports, and or they look at that individual's phone, and or get a statement from that individual or a witness that says, yeah, they were looking at their phone when they crashed. So I always mention respondersafety.com. You can get a TIM, Traffic Incident Management certificate, from them for free. You can learn a whole lot about the NFPA and markings and what the fire service does to keep their personnel safe. And some of that all ties into what we do on crash scenes. So it's very important training. As of December 29th, there were 35 first responders killed, according to them, across the United States for 2025. They recorded 16 law enforcement officers killed. I simply remind you that there are some who go into that category that we don't count because they don't have sworn arrest powers and full service law enforcement capacity. They weren't fully sworn officers. And if they're volunteers or reserves or crossing guards, whatever it may be, you can put that under law enforcement, but that's not something the Memorial Fund would count. 10 were towing and recovery, and 3 were EMS, and there were 2 Department of Transportation DOT workers that were struck across the country. Towing and recovery usually bears the brunt of this. So for law enforcement to be leading the numbers again, just further emphasizes the fact that we have a problem. And again, I'll mention, this doesn't even touch on all the people who are injured. And I tried to do that, and I'll get into that in a little bit later. Speaking of struck bys, we've already had 2 this year. I'm a former DC Metropolitan Police officer, and Officer Terry Bennett was struck on December 23rd. He succumbed to his injuries in January of 2026. So he will, of course, not be added to the wall this year. He'll be added to the wall in 2027. And right about the same time that Officer Bennett passed away, Officer Laporta from Uxbridge, Massachusetts, was struck and killed. This was weather played a factor in this case, it appears. He was struck by a tractor trailer, but he was out of his vehicle assisting with another vehicle. And apparently there was an ice storm going on that was creating just havoc on the roadway, period. So this may, a vehicle traveling too fast, maybe. I doubt it was, could have been inattention, but it's probably the conditions that contributed to that unfortunate incident. The individual who struck Officer Bennett had to be given naloxone by the DC Fire Department because he was passed out behind the wheel and was found to be impaired when he was operating his car. He was also speeding. So the other category, as we talk about vehicles, we talk about struck by. Our third and final category is motorcycle fatalities. At the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned that we have one more motorcycle case that I haven't analyzed yet because we haven't gotten the details, and it's in my count, but it's not in what I'm presenting to you because I haven't had an opportunity to review the circumstances. 2 of the officers who were struck were conducting escorts. And I got some escort numbers when I was doing an injury analysis. Escorts, without a doubt, is one of the most common circumstances where police officers, motorcycle police officers, are struck and killed. They're struck and killed as they go ahead to cut and pull traffic at an intersection so that the escort detail can be pushed through that intersection, and or they get struck and killed by people turning out of line. They don't want to go the whole way. There's something's going on. They've changed it, whatever it is. And that motorcycle officer is coming up alongside of them, sometimes in the, on the other side of the double yellow line on the left to pass them to get ahead to, again, cut and pull that traffic. It's very dangerous, and we consistently have fatalities with officers doing that every year. 2 of them were on admin duties. One was responding back to his agency for a meeting, and I believe the other one was responding to a post. One was on patrol, and then I mentioned we had a case where a motor officer was intentionally struck and killed by a guy in a pickup truck. And interestingly enough, it was that suspect's family who turned him in and called the police and said, he's down here, come on and get him. And they went down and found him. So NHTSA is always interested in where these are happening. And this is something, I've been doing this now for over 10 years. And I say it every time. Region 6 is a big area geographically, a lot of population, but this hasn't changed. In all the years I've been doing it, Region 6 has the highest number of law enforcement traffic-related fatalities. This year, California and Texas are tied with 6 fatalities, law enforcement traffic-related fatalities each. But Region 6 itself, which you see has Oklahoma, New Mexico, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas in it, had the highest number with 12 law enforcement fatalities out of that region this year. So we always keep a track on that. And when we talk and meet with below 100 and we decide where to go for conferences and that kind of thing, we try to focus in those areas. And we have some traffic liaison folks that we work with in the area of Texas and in that region there, and the LALs who are down there, always trying to feed them information and support them in efforts to try and reduce some of these crashes. So that's it for 2025. as far as crashes go. And if you've followed these webinars, you know I've started reporting on stolen police vehicles. And the reason I do that is because it leads to a pursuit 100% of the time, or almost 100% of the time. In one of these cases, a car was stolen and it was so far gone, there was no pursuit. They had to go find it abandoned someplace. But in almost all the other ones, it leads to a pursuit. And sometimes those end very badly for officers, innocent civilians, and even the suspect. So in 2025, I was able to find 55 reports of police vehicles being stolen. The most common thing is when someone is arriving on the scene, they leave their car running, they're getting out to either make contact with someone, or they've left their car running while they're going to assist an officer. Somebody starts moving away from the officers as they're interviewing somebody, and they run and jump in that car. Some of these happen as soon as the officers arrive, they jump into that car and take off. Maybe somebody in the chat can tell me why officers don't just take the keys with them when they get out. I go and get my lunch every once in a while, and there's some local officers here. And when they go in to get their lunch, for some reason, maybe their cars are locked, but they always leave their cars running. I don't understand why. Maybe somebody I don't think the battery's going to die. I don't think the police radio is going to die. Maybe they're charging their phone. I don't know. But when I was on the job and I got to my call or was jumping out, even if it was, I turned the engine off and got out for that very reason. But I've mentioned Tremco switches, which are switches that can be installed, which will, if you don't know where the switch is, you won't know how to get the car in gear. So folks can research that. But I talk about these because we've got to reduce the number of stolen vehicles. I mean, your car is going to get wrecked. You're going to be without a car. In one case, this guy who stole a police car, he made a traffic stop and carjacked another car. So it just can't be allowed. And if we take care of the problem ahead of hand, not letting it get out of hand, I think that's the right way to go. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. This is an image of a guy who actually intentionally rear-ended that car while that officer was on a traffic stop. He said he hated cops and he tore up his Camaro. The 2025 injury report. So this year, I've been doing it for years, but this year's I really got into it, opened up more sources, searched different ways, and I was able to find 394 news reports of officers who were injured in crashes. Out of those 394 news reports, I discovered that there were 429 injuries to law enforcement reported out of those 394 cases. And those injuries came from auto crashes, struck by crashes, single vehicle crashes, and motos, right? Same categories as with our fatals, but now I'm looking at trying to understand what's happening with the injuries. Are we seeing the same type of circumstances in injury crashes? So 277 of them involved auto crashes. 51 were struck by crashes where officers were injured being struck by vehicles. And those aren't all on the roadway. Sometimes it's officers being struck by other police officers in foot pursuits. Sometimes it's people being hit by a vehicle in a parking lot, whatever it may be. But the majority of those are secondary strikes on the highway. 18 single vehicle crashes, meaning they wreck their car without having a collision. Usually it's due to a loss of control and or speed. And then motos, again, there were 14 moto officers that I found reports of them being injured. 3 of them were conducting escorts. Once again, escorts, one of the more common circumstances we see motor officers involved in. So 117 of these injury cases involved pursuits. So it's almost a quarter of them, 25% involved pursuits. 63 of the cases I was able to determine involved a violation of the SDMO, which is short for slow down and move over. 61 of the cases, the initial reports, confirmed impairment, and 35 reported the individual involved was distracted. So it's a sort of a good look at what's happening out there in the roadway, and clearly impaired driving and distracted driving are big concerns for us on the roadway. Our safety topics, which we always put out, I've talked about seatbelts. Complacency is a big issue. I think seatbelts tie into that, but we get folks who are used to driving a certain way, used to managing their cars a certain way, and not thinking about what's happening, right? What's important now? which is a tenet of below 100. Fatigue, some of these officers working long shifts, being called back in, forced to stay and work overtime, etc. That's a big problem. Tire deflation devices, I covered that. Training. There was an article recently put out in Police One, and I think the title of the article was somewhere along the lines of, how is your agency doing in terms of EVOC training? Or is your agency ignoring EVOC training, which is EVOC, emergency vehicle operations? And this is kind of the big fish for me, because if we, I believe, enhance our training and take everything I'm telling you with these recommendations, we can reduce crashes even further, right? We train with our firearms twice a year. How about we get vehicle training, policy review, pursuit review at least once a year? I know it's tough to get hands-on training on a track, but again, if you go to Destination Zero, you'll find what other agencies, small agencies did, to go to airports, to go to stadiums, to meet with the military, use some of their facilities to get out there and get their cars up to speed where they can train and work on these skills. And I would remind you that there is this Penn Start facility being built outside of Pittsburgh, something that you'll probably hear more about. I've mentioned it before. We mentioned it in our Traffic Safety Summit. This is going to be a place nationally for agencies to come to learn safety. Not only learn safety, but it's a testing track. It's an experimental track. It's a place where we can teach TIM. It's a place where we can teach pursuits, all these kind of things. So I'm excited about Penn Start, and you'll be hearing more about that. I mentioned right side approaches, body armor. That's something else I look at. I don't think I grabbed the statistics for body armor for our fatal crashes, but we do look at that. And there were a couple of officers who were not wearing their body armor, but the majority were. So I was pleased with that. Every once in a while, you'll find an officer, and strangely enough, sometimes it's motor officers who, for whatever reason, are not wearing their body armor, soft body armor. So that's me. If you would like to get in touch with Matt Garcia with regard to the Ambassador Program, who's our program manager, you can send me an email here and I'll put you in touch with him. Actually, his email is on the website as well. So if you go to the website, you'll see his email there. This is my email. If you have any questions or comments or whatever that didn't get into the chat, let me know, and I'd be happy to answer it or give you whatever information you're interested in. We are going to go back to producing the flash drives. If any of you are familiar with the flash drives we prepare, we have them. We will have them for Lifesavers. We'll be at Lifesavers in Baltimore in April. We'll be going to Western State Sheriffs in I think that's that's in March, right? And so we'll have the flash drives ready by then. And it's just a simple key-shaped USB drive that has all of our information on it, all of our safety videos, all of the up-to-date information. It'll have this presentation on it. So you can use it to present it yourself. None of this is proprietary. This is your tax dollars at work. There are no secrets here. We want people to know what this data says and to act on it. And then the flash drive, like I said, has a couple of videos and some printable infographics with this data, trying to emphasize what is going on. The last thing I'll mention is we are developing an interactive map that will show all of the fatalities that have occurred that were a violation of slow down and move over. So as you hover over a map of the United States and you click on, say, Ohio, those three fatalities that are there, the picture and information on the crashes will pop up. You can get a copy of what it says is the state's actual law, and the states all write them differently. So I went through and got all 50 states' laws. And then there'll be a series of just images showing non-fatal, but showing what happens so constantly and commonly on our roadways when police cars are being rear-ended on the roadway by distracted drivers. And so we've reached out to every state law enforcement agency to ask them if they have an image to share with us of a crumpled police car. We don't want images that involve a fatality, but it's very common where officers are injured or they're outside of their car and their unit just gets crushed by a distracted or impaired driver who is not obeying the slow down and move over law. So I think that's all we have. If we don't have any questions, okay, I'll close it out. Thank you all very much for your attendance. And we should be having our first quarter, which will update and cover where we are sometime in March, and we'll push that date out. So I want to thank you very much for your indulgence. Be safe out there. Thank you.